morning, and thank you for waiting for those who came later. So we'll start the talk now. And I'm not sure if all of you know what this talk is about. Okay, because I think some of you just came for friends. So basically, this project was conceptualized last year between myself, Guo Quan, and Alvin. I'll introduce them in a while. And we wanted to look at women's stories. Guo Quan is a professor at NUS. He teaches history, and he had written a book about the women in Indonesia, particularly the local women who had married Chinese men. And he found a lot of interesting stories there. So we wanted to look at similar stories in Singapore, and particularly in this area, because when you look at famous women in Singapore, they are all illustrious lawyers, doctors, women's rights activists, and so forth. And we didn't find any in Joo Chiat, so we wanted to look for some. Okay, so basically this is an overview of what we'll be covering today, and what I just told you about why we started this project. So, so why did we choose to do women's stories? As you can see from this really interesting infographic, from the time where Singapore became like a, I would say, modern settlement where a lot of influx of foreigners came, it was mostly men who came because they came to trade or look for work. So the women didn't come with them. Some married local women, and it was only around the 1940s, after the war, that the number of women and men in Singapore were almost at parity. So even then, why is it in our history books we always read about the men's stories? This was the reason why the three of us wanted to explore with three students from NUS, women's stories. Okay, so I'll introduce the team. Myself, I'm Dawn. I'm a writer and researcher. Alvin there. Alvin, could you stand up? So Alvin is the founder and artistic director of The Necessary Stage. They do a lot of works based on social issues. And then we have Guo Quan over there, who is a professor at NUS of history. And he also is interested in exploring women's histories. We have our student researchers, Kendra over here. She's a first-year history student, and she has particular interest in the Orang Laut. And Xing Yu is a first-year Chinese studies student. We have another researcher, but she's overseas on a plane, couldn't be here. Her name was Xin Chen. So the six of us put together this entire project. Okay, so we're going to a brief history of Katong Joo Chiat. Quite a few of you here have been doing groundwork or volunteer work in Katong Joo Chiat, so you may already know this, but just bear with me. Okay, so basically, the Katong Joo Chiat we know today is not what it was in the past. It was a more spread out area that went from maybe Siglap to the sea to Geylang Serai. When Singapore was first founded, when the British first arrived in 1819, Tanjung Katong was the eastern boundary. So that was the easternmost part of Singapore. And then it was a seafront for a lot of bungalows and holiday homes for people to come and relax. And in Joo Chiat, from the 1920s, it was coconut and cotton plantations. So this area was largely undeveloped, and it attracted a lot of wealthier merchants who had lived in the city. They were mainly Europeans, Jews, Chinese, and so on, and they moved over to this area to develop the place. So more and more residential homes were built, as well as commercial businesses. And in 2011, the NHB declared Joo Chiat as the Singapore's first heritage town. Okay, some interesting trivia and milestones of Joo Chiat. So, as in 1906, the Tanjung Katong Swimming Club already existed. It was on the seafront, and people would go swim in the sea. And there was a crocodile, but there was diving platforms built already. And one day, they spotted a crocodile sunbathing on a diving platform. So a gentleman called Mr. Hockwell who was taking his students to train for swimming competition from the St. Andrew's Club, took out his revolver and shot at the crocodile, and it scuttled away into the bushes. So that caused some excitement. And back then in Singapore, the government was actually paying people to kill crocodiles because they were quite a menace, attacking fishermen, swimmers, and so forth. And today we still see them sometimes in Sungai Buloh, if you're lucky enough or unlucky enough. So, did some of you know that Charlie Chaplin actually came to stay in Katong, Joo Chiat? He was a guest here in 1932 and he stayed at the Sea View Hotel. He was invited by, I think, Ong Boon Tat, who owned New World. They were entertainment business owners and they invited him here. So he actually had were hosted to a lot of teas and dinners with some wealthy Eurasian families from the Franco estate, and also the Rani of Sarawak came down to meet him here. So, and the first electric street lamps were tested in East Coast Road in 1938. And a bit of trivia. Some of you may know, but some of you look very young. So once upon a time, there was a Malaysian Chinese Communist Party. They were rather active in Singapore because they were trying to work to get rid of the colonial British government. But even after independence, they were working in Singapore and Malaya. So they actually fought for workers' rights and they used guerrilla tactics to try to bomb places that they thought they were unfair practices. So in this case, three gentlemen decided to bomb the home of the owner of the Nanyang shoe factory because he believed they were oppressing the workers there. So they drove in their car along Steel Road with a couple of bombs, but unfortunately the rattling caused a bomb to explode. So two of them died and one of them was seriously injured, but he was arrested. Okay? And you see this gruesome picture there. In fact, there were more photos and very gory details purposely reported in the Straits Times to show what kind of antics the Communist Party were making on business owners. So this was some of the things that happened in Katong, Joo Chiat. And also when we look at notable historical figures in the area, what came up were men. So Joo Chiat is named after Joo Chiat, who was a landowner. He grew coconut and cotton. And basically because he developed this area, the road was named after him. And then it later grew into a district. Okay. And then there was Charles Joseph Pagla. He was a Eurasian doctor who was very active during World War II. Because a lot of Eurasians at that time were brought to Johor to an internment camp, and to help them, he made a deal with the Japanese to be able to give them medical supplies and aid. So after the war, he was seen by the British as a collaborator, and they wanted to charge him. However, because he had represented and saved the Eurasian community, he was kind of declared as one of the war heroes. He himself was a medical doctor and an obstetrician, so he opened his clinic at where Telok Kurau Road is now, where Parkway Hospital is. And another famous person who stayed here was Cheong Kun Siang. He was a real estate agent and he had built the Theatre Royal and the Star Opera Company, and Kun Seng Road was named after him. So the street with the colourful houses that you see nearby. So we were looking for famous women in Joo Chiat, and actually when they were none, we couldn't find any except one who was the daughter of Joo Chiat. So you'll meet her next. Her name was Nyonya Chu Kui Nyo, and when Joo Chiat came to Singapore in the mid-1800s, or actually 1870s, he already had a wife and family in China. So this was very common with men from southern China who came to Singapore. But when he came here, he decided to marry a local woman, a Peranakan woman, and of that union, they had one daughter, which was her. Okay, she later became the wife of Mr. Tian Sek, a comprador of the Batu Pahat Bank. So they were Peranakan Chinese, and at that time the Peranakan Chinese were given favoured positions in the government and in commercial businesses because they could speak English and could also deal with as an in-between between the local Chinese workers and the British colonial government. So what she did was that she vowed to build a Buddhist temple if her family was saved after World War II. And when her husband passed away, she engaged a young monk, Mahaviwara, to conduct the rites. So she was very moved that this Buddhist ceremony was very simple yet meaningful, and she pledged to donate the land for a temple after the war. So in 1959, she did so. This temple still stands today, and it was once a part of a coconut plantation that was owned by her father. It is diagonally opposite the Eunos MRT. So the Mangala Vihara is still there. And it has since become a major Buddhist education center, Theravada Buddhism. The process of our creating this project and some of the women's stories that we came across. So what we did was we wanted to record oral histories of women who lived and worked in this area, and we looked for women of very diverse background. So we must have contacted probably over 20 women, and 6 of them agreed to share their story publicly. Some of them wanted anonymity, which was not possible because we were going to share this in a talk. So they not only told their stories of themselves, but of their mothers and their grandmothers, which was very interesting. We conducted over 24 hours of research, and then further time spent on historical research, and our 3 student researchers did further analysis. So we found some common points in all the stories. So as you read this, I'll share with you 1 or 2 stories of the women we interviewed. One of the women she was adopted by a dancing girl. This dancing girl was very, very famous. I can't remember which cabaret, but she later on she became the president of the Cabaret Girls Association. However, this lady who shared with us her story cited years of abuse. She believed that she and her sister were adopted to work for the mother because they were not allowed to go to school. As soon as they could walk, they were made to do chores, wash the clothes, do heavy cooking, and so on. We suspect that she might have groomed them to work as dancing girls later, but we cannot confirm. So the juxtaposition of this woman's public life as the president of the Cabaret Girls Association, and she built schools to educate the children of cabaret girls, but did not allow her own adopted daughters to go to school, was very curious and very jarring for us. Later in life, she married a Ceylonese man, and it was him who persuaded her to send her 2 daughters to school. So he rescued them in a way. So this woman, as soon as she could, she tried to get married to escape her home. So she got married at a very young age, at 16 or 17. But unfortunately, her husband died very young, and she was left with 2 young children. She had to become a tour guide, and she cited the help of certain MPs who helped her to get her STB tour guide license to support the children. But because she was frequently away guiding tours, she says till now her daughter resents her because she was never around in her childhood. So to us, these mirrors the stories of the female migrant workers that are in Singapore today who actually leave their homes to get money to raise their children. So it was happening in Singapore, as evidence in this case. Another story I'd like to share with you, which is a rather nice and sweet story. It was a woman from a Malay family whose parents were actually very open. In fact, they lived in a kampong near Geylang Serai, and they were surrounded by Chinese homes. So her mother met and married a man from Yunnan, a fresh immigrant who converted to Islam to be with her. And they raised their children as Muslims. And what was wonderful is because I think it was during the racial riots, they harbored some Chinese children. When the riots were over, the parents of these children agreed for them to become Muslim in gratitude for what this family did for them. So there are such stories of hope and intercultural cooperation that we found also. Okay, so why did we choose oral history interviews? I'll just share with you this and you can read them. Basically, one reason to do this talk is because we wanted to encourage all of you or anyone who watches this, because this will be recorded and put onto YouTube later, to record your own family histories by conducting oral history interviews with your elders. It is important to get these stories because they are not the ones that you read in history books. They are very personal stories, yet they are no less important because they've also helped to shape our communities and our country. Okay, so it's important to do oral history interviews for these reasons, and they really show the side of history that we don't hear about. For example, oral history interviews with Elizabeth Choi, the war heroine. So if most of you may know already that she was captured and tortured during the Japanese occupation, but she never broke. She shares how she overcame this, and she had such courage and strength of will. And she recounts an incident where a British bishop was interred with her, and every day he would give her communion with a few grains of rice with water. He would bless it so it would become sacred, and she would take this and she imagined that it gave her strength during the war. So this was conveyed during an oral history interview, which you can listen on the National Archives. So I think such stories didn't really come out in history books, and that's what we wanted to look for in this project. So also we can use oral history interviews to look to act as a voice for those who have not been heard before, and to create stories. So creating stories is another form of sharing histories. Alvin will speak to you next, because in his practice as an artistic director in theatre, they also use oral history interviews to create works. So I invite Alvin now to come and speak.
Okay, basically what my company does is to do a lot of research and fieldwork and interviews, and then it becomes material for us to create works. And then, of course, we have to make arrangements like whether it's anonymous or not, or is it a verbatim thing. So verbatim means the stories are told as it is. It could be the person herself or himself telling the stories, or it could be an actor taking on the stories. That's verbatim. The other one is that we fictionalize it, so that it's anonymous. We have also done interviewing like people in detention, politically detained without trial. We interviewed a few of them, and then there's a composite character composed of all the interviews made. Yeah. So that then we also fictionalize and gain anonymity for the people we interview. Yeah. So there are various methods that we do. So basically, going through this project, interviewing and making visible women or like poor Peranakans. Normally when you see Peranakan plays, it's all the ostentatious and affluent stories are being told, and the middle class overrepresented. The Chinese Peranakans are overrepresented in cultural production. So my interest in it lately, in all these Peranakan interviews and projects, is to look for women's stories told by women, not women's stories told by men. That's very different. And poor stories that there was one we encountered is a woman that had torturous upbringing in a Peranakan household because she was born a woman. So she wasn't a daughter, our sister, she was actually a maid, treated like a maid to the brothers and to the. We don't hear the stories because the Peranakan circles will hush this away because it's face lah. Yeah. So these are the things that I think we need to hear. We need to get it represented in the public domain. Yeah. So okay, yeah. So I am just deviating a little bit just to show a project very quickly. This is our biggest project that we've done in our history. It involves Japan, Thailand, the Philippines and Singapore. So it's an intercultural project, and it is the mobility of Asians. So that like migrant workers and people moving about and adopting cultures of countries that host them, or that adopted them, or they adopt. Yeah. So power differentials, everything. But before we can do that, we need the field work and we need the interviews, because or not it's books that we read or things that we imagine, and it's not good enough. So that's my Japanese co-director, Japanese translator, and the Thai people. Okay, so this was done I think 20 over years ago. Okay, next. So so this we had the workshop in Thailand. Sorry, yeah. So this was as you can see, we were at a shelter of women who were sex workers, and they are recovering from the trauma. So this is CPOM. So we can't take the women, right? So we took the practitioners, listening to the stories the women were telling. Down here, this one was young girls before they were being trafficked but rescued and saved. So we really went to find out what's on the ground, because we won't know the stories, right? So although we are in Asia, we don't know the specificities of it, the situation, the power differentials, the culture expression. So down here is the woman in the orange thing, a white t-shirt, is a Japanese translator. So she will translate the woman in blue blouse. She will speak in English because the sex workers interviewed are speaking Thai. So she will translate in English, and the Japanese translator will translate to my co-director in Japanese, because my co-director only speaks 5% English. Yeah, so it's that kind of complexity. And then he is another Thai person. He's the director and actor. He will translate in English to the rest of the people in the room. The woman in blue will translate, will do it in whisper, because she has to, her translation has to be recorded so that we can transcribe for later reference. Okay, next. Yeah, then we continued the workshop in Thailand. Then in Tokyo, we interviewed the Filipinos that were living in Japan, and they were being we got them from church as well as amateur drama group, and young Filipinos as well as young adults and older Filipinos, and how they feel as a Filipino growing up and working in Tokyo. Okay, next. Then after all that, we will do drama exercises, and then improvisation. Yeah, that's where the material gets translated through a creative process into stories that can be then used for theatre. Okay, next. Then we have to show it. We have a showcase, and we have to show it to the Japanese audience, because it's mixed language, and the Japanese audience are used to Japanese plays. They're quite monolingual and monocultural. So bringing intercultural work and with multiple languages, which Singapore group can do because we grew up with this kind of vocabulary. So we show it and then get feedback from them, and we continue developing the work in our TNS backlogs. Okay, next. And then finally, it's staged at Singapore Arts Festival, and then in Malaysia, and then finally 2 years later in Setagaya Theatre in Tokyo. I think that's it. So that's the process which we hope from the data we've collected. I'm going to continue interviewing Kala because we have a playwright that is interested in color stories, for example, and how we will evolve. So the data won't just stop there. Collecting the data, it will have a future. Okay, that's it.
Can you share your own experience working on this project and how they can apply our histories if they want to collect it?
I guess
Listening to
okay,
all the
yeah.
women that we
It's so interesting because Dawn and I did the first interviews, and the questions we asked were very different with the women. And then we got the history students coming in, and they are much younger. And the women that the profiles and what they were curious about were different set of things that they were observing, and so they led the second set of interviews and questions with the women. So it was interesting how different things got teased out, and also there's a generational difference. And I'm not sure, but I anticipate that the younger ones talking to the women of a different age will tease out different responses. Yeah. So it was so interesting because the material that came out both were transcribed or audio captured in an audio way. You can see the different angles, and there are the different ways the stories are told as well. Is kind of very important. So so in that sense, there are different perspectives as well. So gender, ethnicity, age all come into play in terms of interview techniques and approaches. It's a luxury that this project has afforded us, so that we could actually see the multiplicity of perspectives that emerge from this experience. Okay?
Thank you, Alvin. Kindly enlighten us, and he will share with you today what moral geography is and how it is used in women's histories.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Can I begin by thanking NHB for funding the project, and also Don for sort of managing the team and the whole process so well. Thanks, Don. So let me just dive right in. And the reason why we got together, as Don shared earlier on, was because I invited Alvin and Don to be the discussants of my recently published book, Strangers in the Family, right? That's happy here if you're interested, right? But it looks at the production of Chinese racial identity in Indonesia, colonial Indonesia, right? But from a gender and kind of inter-ethnic perspective. So I'm Singaporean, right? The reason why I chose to work on Indonesia is because the primary sources are there to do these kinds of history, right? Unfortunately, we don't have, the archives. The Dutch were, very good keepers of records, right? And so this project is sort of a homecoming for me, or one of the reasons why I reached out to you as well, right? I hope folks in the community, Peranakan community here would read the book and give me some feedback. So one of the things we insisted on was to look for interview subjects who, of course, were women, but also found themselves in inter-ethnic, intercultural contexts, right? And what I learned doing the research for my book was that to the Chinese, right, race is more lineage than race as we know it from the West, right? And it's essentially a form of marriage prohibition. And there's no law releasing, right, intermarriage. It's essentially your parents frowning and saying no. Yeah, and that's it, right? So I had reconstructed that for Indonesia. And I think that's the kind of bigger intellectual curiosity that's driving this project. So some of the questions that we shared, right? So for instance, the modern marriage laws in the region really were introduced, right, either by the colonial authorities or at the urging of the colonial authorities, right? And a lot of the early reformers then picked up, questions of, so they're very complicated questions, right? To be civilized, you have to be monogamous. The Chinese were not, right? And a lot of the Asian cultures were not as well. And so one of the conclusions was that among Asians, right? So in the West, we had anti-miscegenation laws, especially in the US, right? The law explicitly forbade you from inter-ethnic marriages, right? It's a lot more complex in Asia and in Southeast Asia. The colonial authorities never passed the definitive laws. It was only post-independence that the Asians themselves came around to it. And the general conclusion is that it's more religion than law, right? Of course, there's still a lot to be researched. So that's the sort of general, theoretical, historical kind of context. And when we decided to kind of make a bid for this, right, we had to ground it in a community, right? And it's so wonderful that Katong Joo Chiat has got this long history of being known as a place that's more hybrid, right? Where, as I think Don shared earlier on, it's middle class. Singapore was a migrant society, but it's where people who were ready to settle gravitated to, right? So you found here Arabs, Jews, Eurasians, the wealthier Chinese, and all that. But we stuck to the sort of inter-ethnic focus, right? And I think that's really nice. So moral geography, what we meant by it was the conversation with the Indonesian context is very interesting because under the Dutch, the word apartheid has Dutch origins, right? So the Dutch really did residential racial zoning. If you're Chinese, you have to live. So you go to Indonesia today, right? It's kind of not there, but still there, right? Like every small town has a Chinatown, right? Pecinan or Chinese-kamp in Dutch. The British were different, right? So the question again is very different, a lot more complex. The British more liberal. There's the Raffles Town Plan that we know, we've all heard about, right? But they almost never tried to police it, right? And when we think about ethnicity and where do we draw the ethnic boundaries, then it's a lot more complex. And when we look at Joo Chiat and Katong, then right, it then becomes more social, right? It's more social question. And what I learned from this project, when we interviewed our subjects, there is this sense that, correct me if I'm wrong, like Joo Chiat is more a Chinese place, right? And then there's Geylang Serai, there's more Malay, and we move further eastwards towards the Changi Road, East Coast Road, then the kampongs, mainly Malay kampongs, but some Chinese kampongs as well. So this is the kind of general template, that is that short of colonial social engineering in the Dutch way, right? There's still some kind of enclaving that happened, which is natural in like migrant societies, right? But we are interested in kind of like poking at that as well. And we find that actually, this is another conclusion that came out of the book, right? That women are the ones who always cross boundaries, right? They are men, if, as I mentioned earlier on, right? If raised to the Chinese and actually some Asian cultures as well, it's more patrilineal. There's a higher chance when women marry across a different culture, then they are the ones who move, right? They are strangers in the families, so to speak. Yeah. So that's generally the idea of moral geography, right?
Yeah.
So
basically, what you just mentioned, and then
maybe we go to the 5 points.
Yeah.
So it's still work in progress, right? But a few things we've found is that from around the the women we've interviewed, right, most of them came of age 60s, 70s, and it's amazing how they all upset our kind of conventional ideas of again, it's a Chinese one, but it's also shared in some of the other cultures here, right? That the place for women is at home, right? And men went out to work to support the family. right? All of them are entrepreneurial, right? And maybe this has something to do with, right? These were people who kind of flouted cultural norms when they crossed ethnic and cultural boundaries. Yeah. So I think I'll just leave it at that, and we can move on to sharing the stories themselves. Yeah.
And what was interesting is, as a Western woman, she was really sincerely interested in intercultural engagement, maybe because she wanted to evangelize as well. But then she learned the language. She learned Tamil and Baba Malay, and she published people in Baba Malay to evangelize. So I thought that was quite interesting for a woman of her time. Now we come to the stories of the three women that we decided to present. And what we've done is each of the students, the history students, have done deeper analysis and research on each of the women. So I invite Carla. Maybe Carla, you'd like to sit here?
Thank you. Thanks so much for taking the time as well. So just a quick introduction. Carla is 77 years old and she's been living in Katong, Joo Chiat for the past 52 years. So maybe get you to introduce yourself a bit more first. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Carla. And here I stayed in that Joo Chiat area for 52 years. And my husband was there. I was staying in Oslo. You know where is Keppel Harbour? I was there. Then my husband stayed at Joo Chiat. After marriage, came and stayed with my husband. So now we are in J Group, also in Joo Chiat, part of Joo Chiat. Then I have two children. And I'm also a grandmother already. I got my granddaughter is already 32 years.
Oh my God.
My eldest granddaughter.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much. So maybe I'll start with the questions. So when you grew up, you actually shared with me in your interview that you lived with your grandmother while you were growing up, right? Yeah. So you shared that she was a rather conservative and controlling woman. Could you actually share with me a little bit more about how she affected your life?
When I was teenage, my grandmother stayed with me. She's very strict. We cannot go out anywhere without her. Wherever we go, she has to accompany us. Then after that, one fine day, she anti-Chinese food, but I love Chinese food. One fine day, I love char siu. I bought char siu that they sell in pieces. Just those days, 30 cents one small piece of char siu. While I'm eating, my grandmother asked me, "What are you eating?" I said, "Char siu." What she did, she took that chakya, that one. She hammered me in the mouth until I bleed. Yes. She said, "Who asked you this?"
What's a chocolate?
It's like solid wood. Yeah, until my lips swell. She said, "Why you eat Chinese food?" I don't know what. I can't even talk, but bleeding. And I studied Sec 4. I want to proceed my study again. She told my father not to let us go and study further artistic. He said, after all, after I study, I will go to the kitchen. We are all kitchen people, no need to have very high education. So what to do?
You also shared with us you have to serve your brothers.
Yeah, and I'm the eldest in the family. I got to serve all we have 10 siblings. And we have to sit at the age of 12, I have to learn to do cooking. My mother will take turns. I do cooking, my another sister do folding of clothes. Those days got no washing machine. We have to do washing. I really go through when I was younger days. Really, I to take care of 10 siblings. My mother will send me to market. We buy the food, come back. Then after that, I have to do housework and study. Where can I concentrate all this? But after I married my husband, my husband very nice man. He gave me freedom. So went to my mother-in-law's house. 30 people staying in one house. All, including the children's house, 30 people. And the pot, you see, so big pot. All one auntie, there you saw the auntie. This is my sibling, my father. No, the auntie there. Your one auntie, she's a cook. She does the cooking for the whole family. and the pot very big pots. And then when we buy noodles, we go to the market. Those days, keti. We will ask 5 keti mee, 5 keti kway teow. The man asked, "You have stall? Are you doing so much of?"
One keti is 600 grams, so that's 3 kilos of meat each
Yeah.
time.
Then so big family. So when you want to buy anything, you have to think twice whether can afford to buy now. Because if I buy, we have to buy for the whole family. Cannot buy for ourselves. When I was expecting, I feel like eating anything passes by. I can't buy. I can't afford. My husband those days he's now. He was a police constable. After he became an inspector, when the constable time, he can't afford. His pay is very small. Pay he got. What went to that? I managed now. Then we got house near Joo Chiat. I told my husband to apply. My husband refused because he got his brothers, 7 of them. He said all the brothers and sisters haven't get married. How to leave the house? I said just apply. He scolded me, and I whispered to him slowly, please apply. The house, too many people already here. So he applied. Within 3 months, we didn't know because he's in the police force. Within 3 months, we got the house already. So we scared to tell our house people how. And my husband said, "Yeah, you asked for the house, right? Go and talk to them."
So maybe you can share who was in charge of the Changi Road house. Who was the head?
My father-in-law is the head of the house. Then after my father-in-law passed away, my mother-in-law took over. When my mother-in-law took over already, then all get married, all the siblings all get married. So we intend to sell the house. Then my husband gave it to the uncle. He said he doesn't want any money. Ask the uncle to buy a house and just keep the house. So my uncle took all the house money from the house that he sold. But he gave my mother-in-law and my 2 sisters-in-law. They wanted to give her. After that, my husband said, "I don't want any money." So I was a bit free when I go to my own house. I can do whatever I want. In there, if you buy a dress also, you can show everybody. Nice or not, this nice or not. If you buy a sari, yes, you buy a sari and show to everybody. How's the sari? One day I bought the sari, I never show anybody. So when I tie, they all ask, "Where did you buy this? I never see you tying this ring." This is what one big house, a big family will happen like that. So this is what.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with all of me. And I know the stuff that you shared with about like your experiences growing up. Yeah,
Once a month, we will meet up together. We go to any hotels, but we pay Dutch. We will mingle with all my friends. Still today, I have all my childhood friends.
So nice.
Yeah.
So not so much of a huge
And
culture shock.
Yes, my friends also very old friends that I got. She also my good friend.
okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, so besides that, besides these stories of her growing up, I think something I should also point out is that she actually also actively does cooking demonstrations for
Cooking demonstrator.
chili Peranakan.
Yes.
There's a question.
Sorry. I'm a mixed race Peranakan, so I'm very intrigued. This picture on the right hand side, if you don't mind me asking, the one lady in the middle looks much fairer, and then the old grandma, she looks like she would have looked like my own Chinese grandmother.
Is it?
Are they? How mixed race?
Our family got so many intermarriage. Even my family, my daughter-in-law is Chinese. Intermarried. Yeah. So this is my husband's side people.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So besides like doing cooking demonstrations and particularly in places like the NHB Heritage Exhibition roads, she's also done things such as helping her son's business, selling curry, as well as working as a AIA insurance agent and an auditor also. So now I'll be moving more towards the findings, some things that I found as after I interviewed her. So
So the findings are what we asked the students to tell us their opinions and their analysis of the women they interviewed. We wanted this project to be intergenerational because we felt it's very important to hear from the young people, and this is what they felt about the stories they heard.
yeah, thank you. So what I found to be particularly striking about Kala's story is that she's a really resilient and adaptable woman. So I think she shared with us about how she grew up with her grandmother who's very patriarchal, and she had some beliefs, right? For example, not mixing with Chinese family. I think to be able to grow up, and I think she also shared about how she cared for her children, and she still valued things such as the being able to learn how to cook, to provide for the family. This idea of being very resilient and very adaptable is something that I could really see in her. And then additionally, she's also someone who is very adaptable, right? So she grew up in an Indian family, and then she married into a Chitty Peranakan family. There are some similarities and differences between the two cultures, but in these different settings, she's able to adapt and assimilate into the family. So I think also in the interview, also particularly when she was talking about helping to run her son's business, she also faced some challenges and difficulties along the way. But I also found that she was able to solve these problems in a very calm and relaxed manner. And I think also she also shared with me in the phone call a few days ago about how she actually made she now makes snacks on Bookroom, right? Yeah, so she made that, I think if I'm not mistaken, 18 years old. And then when she married into the family, she wanted to allow her aunt to be able to earn all these profits from making the muruku. So instead of making the muruku, she actually took the orders. But I think also looking at how she's still making and selling muruku, I think this the fact that she could take all these orders also help her now also to be able to sell her snacks. And she's also actively contributing to society, right? So from things such as her teaching different educating the public about Chitty Peranakan cuisine, right? So and she's also shared with me stories about how there was a man who had some mental conditions, and the family was still taking care of him despite the fact that he has a mental condition. She's someone who really looks out for other people and helps the less fortunate. So looking at the role of women in society, I think Kala actually seeks to redefine what women in the 60s and 70s is, right? So besides what Dr. Seng and earlier the speakers have mentioned about how women are their primary responsibility is to be at home, to care for the domestic affairs at home. She's also somebody who is able to be a civic-minded citizen, as well as somebody who's able to actively contribute to the workforce in productive ways. So as she mentioned, she did not further her studies after secondary school, but I think it's really amazing that she can go out to work in places such as auditing, working in the law firm also, as well as insurance agents, and being able to make friends and have a productive career. And I think also with relation to the house, the role of women as housewives is not just about managing domestic affairs. I also learned yesterday in a separate talk that I attended that women are also, in some sense, ambassadors and educators of culture. So which actually shapes the identity of the children and people in the family. And I think this makes women to be equal to men in that light. But also knowing that she has a very understanding and loving husband, I think this was also what allowed her to be able to fulfill these duties in a very excellent and gracious manner. So besides this, other key findings that I found from her story includes things such as how she's able to balance the needs and the desires of her in-laws when she was living in a big family in comparison to what she wanted for her own family, as well as how she's also very open and accepting to people who are of different cultures and different races, making friends with them, playing with them, making memories and bonds. I think that's really very admirable and respectable. With regards to her meeting her husband and getting married to her husband, this was a love marriage. So in my research, I found out that well, Indian families, like typically from what I understand, if I'm not mistaken, usually they will matchmake the daughters to the husband, right? But in Kala's case, her marriage was actually a love marriage. She actually told me that she actually introduced, the husband was introduced to her by a friend, and they actually fell in love through a phone call, which is very sweet, right? and then from the
See each other's face.
yeah.
Just through the phone, we talk to each other. Because my friend, one of my Chinese friends, introduced him to me in the phone. For this has been going on for 1 year. Later, then he wanted to see me in person because my grandmother won't allow me to go out alone. You cannot go out. Those days very strict. And I told him, if you want to see me, come to my house. I spoke to my mother. My mother said, ask him to come. So my mother saw him lah. After that, she was so bad. She said, okay, I believe her lah. Because she scared I get the man like wrong person, you see. That's why he wants to see. Those days, all this very strict parents.
So,
Okay, yeah.
I just have a question. How old you were when you get married? I mean,
I
you're
got married at the age of 22.
22.
Yeah.
So your grandma didn't allow you to go out all the way until you got married?
No, I got registered. Then she allowed me to go. That also time. Must take me at 6 o'clock. By 9 o'clock must come back. She gave us time, 3 hours, 4 hours. By then we have to come back. Yeah.
So I think I'll end off the sharing with this quote that she shared with me in this interview. So I think she shared with me, right, like when she was very young, like stuff like her mother educating her how to cook food, like she really didn't like it. But when she grew up, she found, and she married and she had her own family, like she realized that, oh, actually this being able to learn how to cook is something that's very important. Yeah, and I think for me it's very heartening to see that even though she faced this kind of challenges, but she was still able to find the goodness in it and impart it to her children. So thank you so much for listening to me and Kala's story.
Anyway, thank you very much for listening to my story. And anyway, if you all want to taste my food, next month, 15 and 16, I'll be at Armenian Street Party.
for the Peranakan Museum.
Yeah, I'll be having a stall there, selling some food. So you all can come over. Okay?
That's her and her family. She has 2 elder brothers, and that's her, I think her 4th, maybe 3rd or 4th birthday. So Sandra is an Eurasian. You can read a bit about her life here, and I'll maybe tell you a little bit about her roots, which we'll see in another slide. Her story is interesting because she's half Eurasian and half Peranakan Chinese. However, we found throughout all the interviews she strongly identifies as Eurasian. And perhaps for several reasons. So this is a little bit about her life, and compared to some of the other ladies we interviewed, she actually had a very privileged and comfortable upbringing. Although her mother's story was rather different. Okay, so that's Sandra in the black kebaya on the extreme right, and her mom is in the black kebaya, second from the left. Okay, so Sandra basically worked in Robinsons. She started in sales first of all, and later she moved on to a management position, and she bettered her education herself through the years. She is not married, and that is by choice. And she's always been very independent. However, unfortunately, she had a foot infection in 2015, and she has very reduced mobility, which is why she cannot be here with us today. Okay, her parents, her father was a Eurasian of Anglo-Indian descent, and her mother was a Hakka Peranakan Chinese. So her father's family, she's not sure but suspects they came from somewhere in India, like maybe Calcutta or Mumbai, but it's not confirmed. She does not know. But her grandfather was the first one who came to Singapore. He came to look for work and he was already a civil engineer. So he found a job with Shell and they posted him to Miri in the oil fields, and that's where her father Arthur was born. And her grandmother was from the Palmer family, a well-known Eurasian family in Singapore, and she was of Scottish and Portuguese heritage. Her mother, the young bride you see here, Roslyn Liu, she was a Hakka Peranakan, and she lived on her own from a very young age, I think 18 or so, for a reason which I'll tell you later. Sandra doesn't know anything about her maternal grandparents except that they were from Bangka. Her maternal grandfather was a Hakka Peranakan from Bangka in Indonesia. So Roslyn's mother died at a young age, and her father remarried 2 sisters. And unfortunately, when he died, they kicked her out of the house. So that was why she had to be on her own. For whatever reason, and Sandra doesn't know, she moved to Joo Chiat to rent a room and look for work. So Sandra's mother had many years in Joo Chiat. This is Sandra's great-grandmother on her father's side, who was Dorothy Ava Palmer. She was an Anglo-Indian, and I think this family was rather well known in the Eurasian community in Singapore. So I'll tell you a little bit about Sandra's mother's story because she shared a large part of her story in her interviews. And her life was vastly different to Sandra's. So her mother is the lady you see in the center, and in the photograph on the left, she is in the extreme left. There she's with her 2 stepmothers, who are sisters, and her father. On the photograph on the right, she is with her biological mother, who Sandra doesn't know anything about. So after she moved to Joo Chiat, when she was probably 18 or 19, she Thank you. Bye-bye. She found work in a seamstress, a tailor shop, without knowing how to sew. So you're wondering how come they took her on. This tailor shop was called Sun Hong, and it was in Joo Chiat Road. And from there, they taught her a trade, and till this day, Sandra is still friends with the daughters of that family, although the tailor shop has long closed down. They were known to make all kinds of clothes, from kabayas to ball gowns to clothes for actresses such as Maria Manado. So from there, Sandra's mother Roslyn came to have a few swan sisters. So in the 50s or even earlier, this was a very popular concept. Women will make friends who we swear to support each other for life. And they were very close and they did almost everything together. So this was one of the ladies who Sandra's mother made clothes for. She was a famous ballroom dancer called Tang. So she would make such beautiful gowns for actresses and celebrities such as her. So these are Sandra's mother on the extreme right and her swan sisters. And her story was also hard because when Sandra's father was 9 years old, he passed away, and her mother had to support the 3 children on her own. So she took work by doing sewing at home. They lived in, I think, Greenfield Drive, and that's how they survived. And later on, they took boarders, meaning tenants in their house. So, as I mentioned, you read about Sandra's story just now, and these are the observations and findings from Sin Tern. Now, one of the interesting things she brought up in her research is in the past, in colonial Singapore, among Eurasians, there was a system or an informal classification called the upper tens and lower six. The upper tens were thought to be of educated, more well-to-do backgrounds, and the lower six were people who considered illiterate or new arrivals. This was a very informal but also a very real kind of social classification because there was a divide between the 2 types of family. Sandra did say that being of Anglo-Indian descent, she did feel sometimes they were looked down upon because they were more Indian compared to the European type of Eurasian. So she did feel that growing up, okay? And also perhaps working for Robinsons and at Robinsons, it was an internalization of this colonial framework, because Sandra mentioned when she went for the interview, and she knew that they purposely wanted to hire English-speaking, convent-educated Eurasian girls. If you fulfilled this criteria, you got the job. So once they saw that she was hired immediately, and she had an entire career there. So we asked her why she identified more as Eurasian, although her mother was Peranakan, and she cooks Peranakan food beautifully. She said that she has always felt closer to the Eurasian side of her family. But interestingly, she also sometimes wears the kebaya, and she was involved in Joo Chiat grassroots work as a Peranakan. So that is a very interesting juxtaposition we find in this story. But again, Xin Chen saw this as how men used her, so to speak, to use her abilities, but took the credit for the work that she did. Okay. So this is Xin Chen's view of Sandra. And now I'll invite Xing Yu to tell you the story of Vicky Quan.
There are some details here that basically outline the progression of Vicky's life, and in general, I felt that 69-year-old Vicky she has a very unique taste for like innovation, and I guess it has like led her to on this journey of redefining her family business. What was interesting is that her fondest memories, even then, right, actually included a lot of spaces in Katong Joo Chiat, such as the sea, the cinema, and her church, as she is a Catholic. And I thought it was very interesting because during our second interview with her, she even talked about how she reimagined the Japanese Godzilla coming in front of the sea, and for those who might not be familiar with the film, I also did a quick search because personally I'm not too familiar as well. But basically, the Japanese Godzilla film, it was kind of a reference to a possible nuclear holocaust in Japan, and it suggested how the very serious influences of atomic bombs in Japan. And I felt that from a very literary perspective, and such a poetic expression that Vicky actually used, right, it kind of showed how she also saw to some extent urban development as a way that kind of encroached onto her life, and especially the sea, because ultimately the sea was reclaimed as marine terrain. Yeah. And also afterwards she also mentioned how she actually started selling cinema tickets, and I felt that this was the very start of her entrepreneurial journey, because she was very proud about how she actually could sell tickets, buy tickets earlier, and then start selling them at lower prices beforehand. And this was something that kind of really influenced her as a kid, and kind of made her describe herself as someone who is rebellious and someone who really likes to innovate. Yeah. And then afterwards, she also experienced the racial riots in 1964, which was quite interesting because she was actually sent to one of her uncle's village, which was encompassed by other Malay kampongs during the riots. And Vicky actually attributes this to her being a girl, and even someone who is a bit more dark skinned. And she talked about how, for her father, she was a bit more dispensable compared to her other brothers. Yeah, but then again, it was exactly because of this that she felt that she was the chosen one to actually go into the kampong village and actually be a messenger for her father. And I guess this also shows how brave Vicky is, and how she's someone who actually tries to go against the gender norms that have been placed onto her. And it also shows how many gender norms, especially for Peranakan women like Vicky, were actually ever changing and they're not something, and they aren't something that they aren't something static. And I guess that's what women like Vicky basically tried to highlight. And afterwards, she even faced like dissent from her parents because she wanted to convert to Catholicism because of how she actually met a lot of very friendly Christians who would buy her items when she was heading for items. And she always, during the interview, it was really interesting that she always mentioned how she thanked God for everything that she got, even though she actually also faced a lot of hardships because of like how certain gender roles were propagated during that period. Yeah, and this also resulted in her having a closer relationship with her mother, and she felt that a lot of cultural roles were played by her mother actually, who was Peranakan Chinese, and her father her father came from Fujian in China and was Hokkien. Yeah, so interestingly, I also felt that the role of culture seemed to be a bit more gendered for Vicky's experience. And eventually, when the younger brother passed away, Vicky decided that it was time for such succession plans to begin. And so you might wonder what happened next. So firstly, the business started from this pop-up store that when her father just moved over.
Street cart.
Oh, sorry, street cart. Yeah. sorry. Yeah, I'm saying this in a very modernized way. Yeah, but yeah. So when they first came, they really had to start from scratch, and I guess it also showed how Vicky actually saw this as an opportunity to really make changes in the business, even though she felt that like the physical labor that was contributed by a man was something that couldn't be denied. Yeah, next. Yeah, and then this is also a picture of them, her brothers and her father working together to basically make popiah skin. And this is something that she characterizes as very important because of how she basically said that most women wouldn't be able to do it, and she recognizes that as well. Yeah,
it's a very physically demanding job. You're on your feet the entire time that you do the skins.
Yeah, and then so this is her father when they got shot. Her brother. Yeah, her brother who passed away when he got shot. Sorry for that. Yeah, and from what Vicky mentioned, she actually had a very close relationship with her brother, and that was what really made her like decide on the succession plan afterwards. So I guess it was this sense of family as well. Yeah, and then this is actually her going to several countries, but in this case it was Netherlands, and she basically got a chance to sell popiah there. And she mentioned how she had to improvise because they ran out of ingredients, so they just got like other ingredients there and made whatever they could make out of those ingredients. And it was very interesting because she actually seemed, when we were talking to her, she actually seemed to be the most excited about that. So I guess there was this idea of like how she could change traditions as well, and in this sense like kind of change culture as well. Yeah. And then this is Michael, her nephew, who is now taking over a business. And after COVID-19, they have actually had increasingly more collaboration, both with National Heritage Board and other businesses who actually want them to come to their spaces and sell and like set up popiah stations. So that's really interesting. But at the same time, you might be wondering where is Vicky in all these photos, right? So actually, Vicky said that she didn't really like taking photos, but at the same time, I also did wonder whether it was because of like how she felt that she was viewed as a woman, and perhaps this, other than the financial reasons of taking photos, I guess her father also didn't really make it a habit to take photos of her because of certain like gender ideologies that were present in that period. Yeah, and also interestingly, for a lot of the publications that the current popiah business has made, like for example, they have this video that was publicized by National Heritage Board as well, as part of like the larger Historic East District initiatives. They actually didn't really include Vicky as well, so it was mostly Michael in the photo. Yeah, so at the same time, I do think that like certain ideals that have affected her since young have also might possibly like been brought to the present as well. Yeah. So in general, I guess these were some like adjectives and descriptions that Vicky actually used during our interview. And yeah, as I mentioned, I guess something that's very important for her is like being entrepreneurial and rebellious, in the sense that she really tried to go against like tradition, and she wanted to do what she wanted for herself, and I think it was a way for her to attain success, even despite despite certain despite certain restrictions she also felt as a woman in growing up in that age, and I guess this also made her very adventurous, and but at the same time also grateful for whatever she had. And this sense of gratefulness was not only linked to like her idea of God and Catholicism, but also her sense of belonging to her family. Yeah, and this is what makes her really passionate about her business. Yeah. And then next. So I guess this also links to how like Vicky has navigated her multiple roles. And what I found that was that she basically navigated most of her roles through the business. But this doesn't necessarily mean that her whole life was about her business, because it was exactly through this experience with business that kind of showed a lot of non-business aspects of her life, and suggested how like certain key themes of like be it urbanization, family, and also like her own personal aspirations kind of came out through the business. So like I guess during our interview we actually found that there was this sense of resignation towards like a lot of urbanization processes going on, but at the same time she was very positive. And I learning about the other women's stories, it was kind of a contrast, but at the same time I realized that it also suggests how like different Peranakan women have different experiences, and there's always this like uniqueness and specificity that like Alvin has mentioned. Alvin has mentioned in previously when discussing about oral histories, and yeah, so in essence, right, something that these are the few common themes that I felt were related to her having to navigate different roles, be it gender, ethnic, and also familiar roles. Yeah. Yeah, next. And then so just now we saw a photo of Vicky. Now this is a photo of me and Vicky. Yeah, so
we had to take pictures of her because she didn't have any pictures of her that she could give us. There were none taken of her as a child.
yeah. So I thought it was a shame, but thankfully we got to take this photo as well. So ultimately I felt that from my position and like as someone who's a bit new to like foreign culture, I had to consider my own positionality. And as a Chinese studies major actually, and like someone who is comparatively more interested in Chinese culture compared to like Singapore in general, I often felt that I was in between, in the sense that whenever I was with my Chinese speaking peers, I didn't feel like Chinese enough, or like I felt that there was this sense of like difference. And when I was with like others, I also did feel that maybe I was not Singaporean enough. So I felt that this feeling of in-betweenness might have also been relevant to how many Peranakans might have navigated their identities as well. And also as a non-Peranakan, I was also questioning how I could really accurately try to understand the different ideals that go on, and like the experiences that they have lived through, because like I'm really new to this. So yeah, and also I also felt that as a male, I will have different perspectives because of my notions of gender, which are probably more modern as compared to like Vicky, who has lived through a different time as well. So I thought that was interesting to look at. And back to the idea of moral geography. So Vicky had this very strong sense of space and place, as I mentioned, especially with relevance to the sea. And also, she also mentioned how the cinema was a place of entertainment, but at the same time, something that she could really escape to. And I felt that to some extent, as the cinema that she visited was actually like mostly Chinese focused, like it focused more on Chinese media that was usually published from like Hong Kong or elsewhere not within mainland China. I also felt that it could have been a space, a more ideological space for like many like ethnic Chinese who basically, for them to basically kind of choose whether they would really wanted to like veer away from the mainland Chinese identity or their current identity that they were trying to shape. Yeah, and so what I felt is that most of the times it was because of such experiences that allowed them to kind of navigate their cultural identities, and in a sense it was easier, or it might have been more apt for women to really like seek to really look at certain cultural traditions and try to like inherit them or make changes accordingly. Yeah, so I guess this could have linked to how like basically it was in the early migrations of like in the early history of Chinese migrations there were China used to there was this idea that male migrants were still sons of China, and I guess this resulted in a lot of like issues related to political allegiance, and for women who usually didn't experience that, they were allowed to like freely roam like the domestic space of culture as well. Yeah, and then this brings the challenge of like how culture can also like modernize, or like how it's represented and repackaged as like a form of like urban identity, and also like ethnic tourism that we see today in Katong Joo Chiat. Yeah, and ultimately I think it also links to like what it means to be Peranakan and like or like even Singaporean in a sense from my perspective as well. And definitely because I'm new, so like I don't really have questions. I definitely don't have all the answers. So like I think the more questions I get, the more questions I think of, I realize the more I can't answer them. Yeah. So just to wrap up, right? I guess like through my own research and readings, I kind of found two interesting quotes. So like the first one, which might not really be directly relevant to Peranakan culture, but I thought it was interesting because of how like it suggests different the idea of like Chineseness can actually link to different national cultures, and I think it also links to like how Singaporean identity can also create like different notions of like Chineseness, Malayness, and even Peranakanness. And like as like growing up, I always wonder why I had to tell people I was Singaporean Chinese when actually I'm just Singaporean, and like maybe to some extent these notions of Chineseness, Malayness are actually embedded in Singaporeanness already. Yeah, so that's something that I also questioned while doing the research. And ultimately, linking this back to like Vicky, product, women and men and culture, I think the quote here it basically highlights how a lot of the cultural sentiments were kind of reconceptualized through like the perspective of women, and I guess and it was through such a method that like many women also found like Vicky found ways to look forward to success and like make their lives better in certain aspects. Yeah, and I think while this is a story of women, it also doesn't exclude men, because at the same time, women like Vicky also acknowledge that many men had that the role of men was also indispensable, and yeah, it suggests how like it suggests a more equalized narrative of many of like women like Vicky. Yeah, thank you.
Peranakan women have a very powerful role within the family. The matriarch, the Peranakan matriarch, always has this outside role, perhaps more so than a Muslim matriarch or a Hindu matriarch or whatever. They seem to be much more kind of cloistered or kept in the back. Is this true? Is this just my idea or just my grandmother?
Yeah, but there's another saying that there's a strong matriarchal culture, but they're not matrilineal.
Yes.
Right? So it's patrilineal, and it's actually quite patriarchal in a sense, right? The idea that women's place is in the household, domestic, and so that's where you get the dominant women. And if you look at the history of the Straits Chinese and shared with the Peranakan Chinese in Indonesia as well, right? The power lies in the matchmaking, right? And it's often connected to back in the days, right? So before love marriage, so we're looking at before, let's say 1920s and 30s, business alliances, right? And so that's where men did the business, but you needed those alliances to further your business interests. Yeah. Working argument, something we are working with, and we are not thinking about nation states as the starting point. Because we are really interested in social history, so we are really working from individual women's stories, families, and then maybe communities, right? But yeah, it's possible to think of how, right, when we haven't got there yet.
Right, so I don't see that coming through. So for example, in Carla's case, was it different when she lived in Keppel and she came into a Chiti Malacca family? Right, so I'm not sure whether all this had an impact on the fact that these women were living in this moral geography called Katong Joo Chiat, because that's the title of this study, right?
And then an hour before the show, when it was sold out, she sold it at 50 cents. So this was when she was as young as 6 or 7 years old. She really realized this. The why she became Catholic. So I think this didn't come out just now. Before their popiah business really took off, they had to make they had to find other ways of making money. So every day after school, every child, she has 3 brothers and she had 2 of them, she and a sister, so 5 of them, was given a basket of 30 to 50 fried popiah, and they are not allowed to come home until they were sold. So they will walk, they lived at the corner, almost near Joo Chiat complex now. They will walk all the way to the end of Katong. Vicky even walked to Siglap. Can you imagine a young child doing that? And she found most of her customers near the church were most kind to her. They will buy 10 pieces, 5 pieces, and she will be sold out quickly. So then she got the idea that, hey, Catholics are very kind. I'm interested in this religion. Yeah, and that's how she became, although her family was Taoist. So I think being in Katong Joo Chiat did have an influence on her in that sense.
Can I? Yeah, correct. I mean, you bring
Very
that up.
interesting observation.
It is correct because I think we still need to go deeper into the whole moral geography. I actually have asked him because I'm developing a regional community of Peranakan in Southeast Asia, starting this year and right up to 2028 when I'm going to do a regional data tour. Yeah, because the different Peranakan communities in Southeast Asia are all different. I want to celebrate the difference. So the moral geography, there's some stories here. Who was Kala's? Someone from Kala's ancestors came from Burma.
Her husband's grandfather.
Yes, and he's a historian. So we haven't yet exhausted the concepts that we're playing with that emerge in this project. We need more time. Yeah, moral geography. I feel there's something very unique here, lah. Like when I'm from St. Patrick's, I don't know about the other places. In St. Patrick's, when we have ethics, I think twice a week or something like that. When we're waiting for our classes, the religious leaders, the imam, the Buddhist monk, the Catholic priest walk together to their ethics class. The St. Patrick's boys are very familiar with this interfaith. When I ask other Singaporeans, they say, "Oh no, that's not my upbringing in school." So that is quite unique. But we need time to find out what's unique in Katong. And I feel in Katong Joo Chiat, there is the environment where intercultural mixing was made very possible. And the environment here, we haven't yet gone, and gone into the flesh of it. Because it needs more funding and more resources to go into it. Yeah, but just touching is a very preliminary, but the potential is there. And like what he's brought up, the women actually cross boundaries more because the social interaction, women have more. The men are not so, they're weaker. And then the entrepreneurial, we also hear stories where colonial people did not want to do business with the women because it's easier to do with the men. They get a drink and then they get a better deal. The women were smarter. Yeah, so there were all these things we hear, but it's still, because the women's stories are all suppressed, lost, not recorded. So it's not as easily accessible and available, which we are now trying to excavate and urgently trying to interview women before they die, because there are a lot of old people. So that's an urgency that had careers in the post-independence period. And I thought what we could have developed a bit more was how the opportunities change over time. Because like someone like Sandra started in the 50s, right? By the 80s, I'm sure the opportunities were different, 90s onwards. But like what John said, there were stories of Singapore women that could have taken place just about anywhere else. But we didn't get a strong sense of that Katong Joo Chiat, except for Vicky's story. And I thought what was another missing link was the fact that she came from a Quick-on-What family. That was almost like the starting point, and how that being part of the family influenced her upbringing.
Yeah.
So maybe if some of the other stories had that kind of stronger Katong link, that would make the study a lot stronger.
This appreciation of the culture, and I think maybe even like the area of Katong Joo Chiat might have influenced her appreciation for like Peranakan culture.
My mom grew up on Old Airport Road, Hougang before that, Hougang Highlands, and then Old Airport. My dad grew up in Geylang. And for 15 years after they were married, we lived in Bedok Reservoir. But if you want to talk about moral geography, we've lived in Katong for 30 years, just 5 minutes from here. And my parents, or at least my mom, always had the aspiration to move to Katong once they could afford it, because the whole idea was Katong is cool, it's got the Peranakan, like Peranakan boys are cool. Like, she always wanted to marry someone Peranakan, but my dad isn't. But I always thought it was, the aspiration. I feel like it's quite an interesting definition of moral geography. My parents grew up very humble. My mom talks about having to really scrape together 10 cents just to get a chimichin kaya bun at that time, and that was a huge treat. Before we lived here, she would take me shopping at Katong Shopping Centre when it was the thing. So, and actually, she's an incredible cook, and her Peranakan food, like we don't eat Peranakan food outside because she makes it beautifully, but we have no Peranakan blood. But anyway, here we are for 30 years. Everybody thinks we're Peranakan, but we're not. But I think that was her aspiration, and we moved here. And my parents were always very progressive as teenagers, as young adults. And by the time we moved here, it was just so seamless, because the nature and the personality of this neighborhood is exactly it. It's flamboyant, it's extrovert, everybody socializes, and we just feel like this is our, our area. So we moved into this aspiration, kind of, and it was mainly driven by my mom's aspirations.
Oh, thank you. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Which year was that? When your mom
We moved here 1993. We stayed in the same house.
Wow.
Thinking about it, and like when I was young, I always thought of like Katong Joo Chiat as like somewhere that's very different. But also like partially because like it was very inaccessible at that period. Or like not so accessible, because like I could only take a bus in, and usually because of how like my old airport is kind of situated in between like the east side of Singapore and like the central areas. So I would usually go more to like the commercial, like the more like business districts, more of the business districts. So like I think for me, I also felt like the culture there was very different, and it made me feel that it was something that was interesting as well. So like to some extent, I could kind of relate to what your mother felt as well.
Yes. Yeah. My dad grew up in up to today. He has all these great stories about Roxy Theatre, Paramount Hotel. Like, he knows all the back lanes of Joo Chiat, because that's where, and Katong, because that's where they would have supper after they went to the movies or went to watch music. And but what's interesting to me as well is my parents married young, and they moved into a flat in Bedok Reservoir, and that was a Singaporean dream. They are secondary school education only. They didn't have much, but they could get a flat of their own with me as the only child then, because of whatever opportunities Singaporeans gave young couples. So, but then once they were able to move here, the Singaporean dream shifted from having their own HDB to raise 2 kids to actually moving to this neighborhood, which they always gravitated to in their youth because of exactly what you said. It's so different. It's got its personality of its own. Like, forget about Orchard Road, that's this is like where it's at.
You mentioned earlier Dr. Pagler. It's a very interesting point, because Pagler had a clinic right? And you may want to study. Eurasian and Peranakan women went to him for abortions.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
He abortion, which was illegal in Singapore,
Yeah.
right? So his clientele was very Eurasian and Peranakan.
That's quite. We didn't think of that, but
Yeah.
because we know of a story in Malacca,
Yes.
maternity clinic, Peranakan doctor, but he did abortions because it was illegal.
Yes.
So that is good point. We can take more out. Yeah.
And then I'll be curious then because there's a maternity hospital right here on Joo Chiat. It's literally a few doors down. I wonder,
Something like
but I think maybe that one was a bit more mainstream.
no, it's like there's something like polyclinic.
Yeah, so it may not do what that doctor does
that
because
one
more
was
mainstream.
Behind is a
I'm pretty sure that was for all the prostitutes who were here. I have seen it.
Okay.
We used to live here. Joo Chiat Road. You know the flat there?
Yeah.
The Hainanese Association. Down here, Joo Chiat, 337 Joo Chiat Road. We used to live. We grew up from there.
So the Chinese-speaking Malay, the Eurasian, and all that, and the Marine Parade wasn't reaching yet. So my mom would bring us to the beach in the evening. Along the way, we'll drop by all the neighbors and talk to them. There was a well, also cut across socioeconomic status, because there were brick houses and there were also attic houses. Then Siglap Road widened. Yeah, last time it was just a small lorong, and Siglap Centre was the wet market.
Right.
And actually, I passed the common water pump where women in sarong at 7 a.m. were washing clothes together. When I followed my mom to the Siglap wet market. So it was pretty mixed. It was so young. I was growing up for 7 years already with intercultural, interethnic, and different languages and different sensibilities and different socioeconomic status. Because there was also a house with 3 stories and attic houses. So it was really very eclectic.
To tag on a little story about the ad hoc cinema, where Vicky used to resell tickets, actually a lot of fights would always break out
Yes.
because people were fighting over seats and coping and everything. So for her to find that business opportunity out of it is actually, that's even more, kudos to her.
That's why I think Xing Yu should have shared that we talked about a little bit about popiah. So when they ran out of ingredients when they were in Netherlands in New York, STB brought them to. Then she said, why don't I just put sugar and peanuts and still sell it? And the crowd went crazy for it because the skin was so soft. Then she's like, I can sell with just peanut and sugar. Her mind is always thinking this way. Entrepreneurial.